What is going on YouTube and Diablo fans? My name's Andreas and welcome to Mana and Motherboards. What a time to be alive. We have the new expansion for Diablo 2 Resurrected after 25 years. We have the new class, the Warlock, and today we are going to be diving into what is arguably the most powerful build that the Warlock has within its arsenal, as well as potentially the most powerful build in the game at the moment, which is even in comparison to the Mosaic Assassin. So let's dive right into the build guide. In the brief week since its release, the Warlock has proven to be a very diverse and very powerful class within Diablo 2 Resurrected, and today we are going to look at what is arguably one of the strongest and possibly even broken skills that the Warlock has in its arsenal, which is Echoing Strike. The Warlock has three skill trees: the Chaos skill tree, the Eldritch skill tree, and the Demon skill tree, and Echoing Strikes can be found within the Eldritch skill tree. And as the tooltip suggests, Echoing Strikes is an attack where you throw out your melee weapon and echoes of your melee weapon that pierce through enemies, dealing damage, and then come back to you like a boomerang and deal damage again on the way back. So I'll quickly show you what that looks like here. As you can see, we will click to throw out our Echoing Strikes, and it goes outwards as a thrown skill and comes back to us almost like a boomerang. Now, one interesting aspect of Echoing Strikes is it uses faster cast rate as opposed to increased attack speed for its attack speed. So in a way, you are more of a caster than a melee-based character, but at the same time you are dealing physical weapon damage. So it's a bit of an interesting skill in that sense, where you're dealing physical weapon damage but you are casting that attack. So just remember that faster cast rate is more important than attack speed for this build and when using Echoing Strike. Being a thrown or sort of ranged melee attack, similar to that of like a multi-shot boson or an assassin, where you click your attack for Echoing Strikes makes it different on its effect. So if you click closer to yourself, you'll see that you get more of an AoE, area of effect, sort of damage and pattern to the skill, where if you click further away, they will converge to a single target. So you can deal more single target damage on, let's say, a boss or an elite pack by aiming where you click to make your Echoing Strikes have a greater spread of damage. So as you can see here, closer to you, big AoE, further away, sort of less AoE for an elite pack, single target, far away, converges much more closely together. So that is just a simple mechanic to take note of when using Echoing Strike. With Echoing Strike, some mechanics work and some don't. For instance, Life Leech and Mana Leech both work, as well as Deadly Strike and offhand enhanced damage, but certain other mechanics such as Crushing Blow and Open Wounds don't work with the skill, unfortunately. So that's something to consider with Echoing Strike. Another interesting observation with Echoing Strike is it doesn't seem to require a hit check, which means it hits automatically, so attack rating isn't necessarily required on this build. And as you can see, it actually adds attack rating, but it doesn't seem to require or use it. So I think there are bugs that are going on with Echoing Strike that are potentially going to be changed and fixed at a later stage, maybe even at the season start. After maxing Echoing Strike, the first synergy that we'll max out is Mirrored Blades, and what Mirrored Blades does is give 5% damage to Echoing Strike every level, as well as every 5th level giving another echo to Echoing Strike. So if we have a look here, we will be throwing out 5 echoes of our weapon with each cast of Echoing Strike, and at a low synergy level of Mirrored Blades, we would only be throwing out 1 weapon that would go out and return to us. So Mirrored Blades is the most important synergy to Echoing Strike to max first, so that we get those maximum 5 echoes with our Echoing Strike. After Mirrored Blades, we will then be maxing out Levitation Mastery, which will add extra damage and attack rating to our attacks, as well as extra critical strike chance, which is a chance to deal double damage. And importantly, it also gives us a weapon requirements reduction of 50%, which will allow us greater flexibility within our stat point allocation and where we put our stat points more into vitality or more into strength for more damage. So this greatly improves our stat distribution and allows us to use those big heavy two-handers that the Warlock relies on, and this build in particular. Next, we will be maxing out Blade Warp, which is a damage synergy for Echoing Strike, and Blade Warp is a line of sight teleport where we throw our weapon out and teleport to it. And while we use this extensively in the early game and while leveling, in the late game we will likely ditch this for Enigma's teleport or a Staff of Teleportation. As we progress through the Eldritch skill tree on our way to Mirrored Blades, we will be putting a point into Cleave, into Psychic Ward, and into Eldritch Blast. We will be using Psychic Ward as an extra layer of defense and damage absorption, and we can also use Eldritch Blast as an extra buff of damage. So if we look here, Eldritch Blast can let out a small AoE around us that does magic damage and also does lifesteal and mana steal. So it's just another layer of buff and extra damage that you can use but isn't necessary. Moving on to the hexes that we will use within the Eldritch skill tree for this build, you will either use Hexbane, which will minus enemy attack rating and minus enemy defense while adding magic damage to your echoes and your attacks, or we will use Hex Purge, which will add a chance for monsters to explode with magic damage when you are attacking them. So it's really up to you. I think Hex Purge has a bit more AoE damage, whilst Hexbane is a bit better single target. It's kind of up to you which one you put a point into, and in my testing it seems like you only need 1 point in either of these for you to get a massive damage boost. It doesn't really help putting much more points into that than 1 point. So these are sort of your Hex 1-point wonders that you will use with this build. The Chaos skill tree is a very simple one for this build, and we will want 1 point into Sigil Lethargy, and what this does is make a buff and debuff area of effect on the ground where monsters' walk and run speed as well as their attack speed is reduced by 50%, as well as the damage they take in that area and a minus to their defense. So this skill is a real 1-point wonder, really strong, really powerful, and it's powerful and useful in this build's kit as well as the Warlock in general. Moving on from the Chaos skill tree to the Demon skill tree, this is where we can really diversify this build as well as dump our points effectively. As a starting point in the Demon skill tree, you are going to want 1 point in every skill that the Demon skill tree has to offer. The two most important skills within the Demon skill tree are Consume and Bind Demon. So what we are going to want to do for Consume is summon a Goatman, and preferably you'd want to summon this away from you so that when you hit your Consume you don't by mistake click on your Bound Demon, which has happened a few times and can be annoying, as getting the right Bound Demon can sometimes be a challenge. By consuming our Goatman, we will get 6% Crushing Blow, which isn't important for this build unfortunately because Echoing Strikes doesn't use Crushing Blow, but it will also give us enhanced damage, which is important, as well as giving us max life and a faster walk run speed, as you can see here. In order to consume your Goatman and have a Bound Demon at the same time, you will need at least 10 soft points into Demonic Mastery, which then gives you a max of 2 demons that you're allowed to summon and use. So you can either put enough hard points into Demonic Mastery or have enough soft points from skills on your gear to get to level 10, which will allow you to have 2 demons, which means you can consume a Goatman and have a Bind Demon at the same time. Bind Demon is an incredibly powerful skill for any Warlock build, and this build is no different. The demon that we have chosen to bind is Hephaestus the Armorer, found in the River of Flame, Act 4 in Hell. Now what is important about Hephaestus is that he is Aura Enchanted, and the aura we are looking for when we bind him specifically is the Fanaticism aura, and that will give us greatly increased damage as well as buffing our party's damage and attack speed. So Fanaticism for this build is what we're looking at when we bind a demon. Now, the more points you put into bind demon can give you more affixes, for instance where it says bound demons gain extra fast and extra strong. Once you put 20 points into bind demon, any demon you bind will be aura enchanted, which means you don't need to go out specifically and find the aura you're looking for or an aura enchanted demon. The one you bind will gain an aura, so you can bind them until you get Fanaticism or the aura you are looking for. So that is another area where you could dump your skill points if you want to guarantee that your bound demon has an aura. The next place you could dump your points would be Consume, which would give you more max life and more run and walk speed. Lastly, as a final option for your skill point dump, you could use Demonic Mastery, and this would give you more max demons that you could have active at one time, as well as attack rating, attack speed, damage, and walk run speed for your demons. So if you had enough skills on your gear, or you put enough hard points into Demonic Mastery, you could potentially have a Consumed Goatman, a bound demon, and then you would want to summon a Defiler as well, which would bind target souls together and would share damage between them, greatly increasing your damage dealt. So that is a very likely and highly regarded option as a skill dump for this build, but like I mentioned, you can put more into Consume or bind demon for those benefits as well. So that wraps up the skill tree for this sort of melee caster interesting hybrid build that Echoing Strikes is, and now we are going to move on to your stat point allocation. When it comes to your stat point allocation for the Echoing Strike build, you really have two options. The first option is to put as much dex and strength as your gear requires, while the remaining points go into your vitality to make you as tanky and survivable with as much life as possible. Your next option would be to put as many points into dex and strength as your gear requires, while just enough into vitality that you are comfortable, so let's say roughly 2000 life after buffs, and then the rest of your points dumped into strength so that you get as much damage as possible from your big two-handed weapons such as your Thundermauls and Warpikes. An important consideration to remember is how much points you need in strength and dex for your weapon after Levitation Mastery is maxed with its weapon requirements reduced by 50%. Now we can look at the exciting part and look at our gear options and choices. So for this build, it's basically important to have a big, heavy-hitting, two-handed weapon with as much maximum damage as possible. So yes, that isn't what you see here that I have equipped. This is kind of just thrown together gear that I have at the moment, but you'll see it can still be quite effective. Ideally, what you would want here is a Fortitude in a Eth Thundermaul, because the skill of Echoing Strike doesn't use durability. You can make it in an Eth base, so it's that weird combination of casting the skill as opposed to physically using it like a melee skill. It's got a lot of quirks like I mentioned before. So a Fortitude in a Eth Thundermaul, or a Breath of the Dying in a Eth Thundermaul, or a Warpike, or a Doom with its plus skills, all of those are very, very good in this slot. Even a Tomb Reaver or a well-rolled Eth Insight, something like that, is a great option. Your options are endless. You basically just want a really high damage weapon. If it has cast rate, as we mentioned, cast rate is more important than IAS for this build, and if it has cast rate, that's fantastic. If it has plus skills, that's fantastic. If it has deadly strike, that is also fantastic. Those are sort of the main things you're looking at for a weapon in this slot: is high damage and cast rate if possible, skills if possible, and deadly strike. So I'm using an Insight. It has that meditation aura to help with mana, and it has the cast rate. It has critical strike, which is great, and just decent damage. If it was Eth, it would be even better, but for the moment it's doing just fine. A great playthrough and leveling weapon option is Insight, because it has that cast rate. It has big enhanced damage in a big two-hand weapon, Also, that critical strike, attributes, mana, magic find are all very useful stats for a sort of intro start weapon for this build. So whilst you're playing through or early end game, this is a great option for you, and putting it in an eth base would be even better. So looking at your shields and offhand, at the moment I'm using a Spirit, but your best in slot option would be to use a Phoenix. The enhanced damage on Phoenix almost doubles your damage output over any other offhand or shield at this point in time, and that redemption aura just makes you incredibly tanky at the same time. Now, there is talk that you may not be able to use a shield and a two-hander in the future. This might get nerfed, in which case you would have to use one of those tomes or grimoires as an option. And the grimoire that is the Mephistos one is a very good option. It gives you skills, faster cast rate, which is very important, as well as extra enhanced damage. So that is a great alternative if this does get nerfed. Otherwise, if you can still use shields and a two-hander, Spirit is a good alternative to your Phoenix, as well as Lidless Wall. If you're playing through, you can use a Splendor or a Rhyme or an Ancient's Pledge. Any of those are good, maybe even a Saigon Shield. But Spirit is a great budget option. Phoenix is your best in slot. Next to Phoenix, that Tome of Mephistos or Grimoire of Mephistos that gives you the skills, the cast rate, and the enhanced damage is your next best option. For your armor, Enigma is going to be your best in slot and go-to armor for this build. The strength that it gives so that you can use these big two-handers is invaluable, as well as the teleport, obviously, and the skills, run, walk, the magic find, all of that are great stats that you want on this build. Enigma is just really fantastic. Your other options would be Fortitude for the enhanced damage, even a Chains of Honor for the extra skills, or that new Warlock specific class armor that gives you 2 skills would also be another option. Sorry, the name just eludes me right now. But all of those are options, with Enigma being your best in slot. So looking at your helm options now, I'm going to be using a Harlequin Crest Shaker, and that is going to generally be your best all-rounder for general gameplay. It's got the all skills, it's got attributes, life, mana, physical damage reduction, and magic find. It's got everything that you need. If you are looking for that best in slot item though, probably a 220 Warlock Circlet with some other nice affixes will be your best in slot. Potentially also that new helm that they have introduced that has 1 to all skills, as well as 20% increased attack speed and 20% faster cast rate. That is also a great option. If you are leveling, a Law Helmet or Tarn Helm would also be a great option. And yeah, there are quite a few options here, with Harlequin Crest being a solid one and a 220 being your best in slot. Looking at gloves, if you are missing your faster cast rate to hit your 75% breakpoint, which this build does sort of require to be smooth, we are going to use either a Trang Ools or a Mage Fit in this slot. And if, for instance, I'm using a Insight and a Spirit, and you don't require that extra faster cast rate, a Laying of Hands for the extra damage to demons is very powerful, or even a Lava Gout or Steel Rend, or alternatively a Drax would also be an option in this slot. Moving on to the belt, an Arachnid Mesh for the cast rate and the 1 to all skills is probably best in slot here. If you don't need the extra faster cast rate, you could always use a Verdungos or a String of Ears to be extra tanky, but Arachnid Mesh is great in this slot and likely the best in slot belt. Looking at the boots, I would say Gore Riders are your best damage option, with War Travs being your best all-round option for magic find and adding a bit of damage. Sandstorm Trek, Silk Weaves, those new Warlock boots are also another option, and you basically can play around depending on how you've spec'd your build and your play style, but I think Gore Riders or War Travs are a solid option in this slot. Lastly, looking at the jewelry, you'd want a Jewel Leech ring that can just provide you your sustain that this build requires, and for your other ring, I'm using a Ravenfrost at the moment, but definitely a Stone of Jordan or a Bull Kathos Wedding Band would be your best options here. Likely a Stone of Jordan would be best in slot. So I would say a dual leech ring for the sustain as well as a Stone of Jordan would be your best options for rings. So for your amulets, I think a High Lord's Wrath for its skill and its deadly strike is best in slot. Otherwise, a caster amulet with 2 to all skills or 2 to warlock skills is probably your next best bet, with Mars also being a safe option. Quickly looking at offhand, we have the obligatory Call to Arms for extra life and an extra skill, as well as a Spirit just to buff that with its extra skills. Looking at our mercenary, he's just wearing a Treachery and a Vamp Gaze, and this is to just keep him alive and keep him doing what he needs to do. And at the moment he's got a Reaper's Toll, which helps me with its Decrypify to deal extra physical damage and break physical immunes, but a Pride for the concentration aura would be your best in slot here, so that you can stack the Might aura that the mercenary inherently has with the concentration aura and your Summon Demons Fanaticism aura, which would stack those 3 damaging auras to give you your maximum damage. So I think an Endarial's, a Fortitude, and a Pride is your best in slot here, with Might being the skill that your mercenary would inherently have. But this is just the setup I'm using at the moment. So I do have the Might aura and the Fanaticism aura, but I am missing that concentration aura. Lastly, with our items, you're going to want a Torch and an Annie. That is just par for the course, obligatory. And you would either want your Eldritch Skillers or max damage charms. So it will have to be a bit of a toss-up which of those will be better for your specific build, but that is what you want. As you can see at the moment, I literally don't have any of those. I've just got thrown together resist charms to get max res, and I will fill that out when I get the opportunity. But my gear is very mid-level, thrown together, but as you will see in the gameplay, it still works very well and very efficiently, which just proves the strength of this build. I think that we have now covered all the details and information you need in order to set up your Echoing Strike Warlock. So now we're just going to go through the buffs you need before heading into battle, and then we're going to show you some gameplay. So once you are outside of town, the first thing you're going to do is weapon swap to your Call to Arms as well as your Spirit, and then you are going to cast your Battle Command and your Battle Orders. Then you'll weapon swap back to your main weapon and offhand, and then you can cast your Psychic Ward in order to gain that extra layer of defense. You can also then put on your Hex Bane to get that extra damage on your attacks. Lastly, or not lastly, second lastly, you can then summon your Goatman and consume him far away from you so that you don't by mistake consume your Hephasto or your Bound Demon with that aura that you tried so hard to find and collect. So always try and summon your Goatman far away from you, and then consume him, importantly, far away from you, so that you don't by mistake get rid of your aura bound demon. And that is basically the buffs that we have on this character. As you can see now, I'm doing about 31k damage, and that does go up a bit when all the other buffs sort of add up. And like I have shown before, this is my gear. It is by no means perfect, and it is just very basic stuff, but it definitely gets the job done. So even with this sort of very mid-game, mid-tier gear, you will see that this is an incredibly powerful build and an incredibly powerful character. So let's dive into a bit of gameplay. So we use teleport to move around and position ourselves, and teleport works really nicely with this build, and Enigma works really nicely with this build because we have those faster cast rate frames from our gear in order to have nice smooth gameplay with echoing strikes, as well as good damage and good attack speed. There we found a little Vamp Gaze, which is our streamer drops, and yeah, the gameplay is really smooth, having those good 75% faster cast rate frames, and the whole build just functions very smoothly. So teleporting around, finding monsters, and just shredding through them with this high damage output that Echoing Strike does. Like, let's look at Lord Decease here. You know, two clicks of Echoing Strikes and he is done. The one thing that really surprises me and amazes me with this build is just how powerful it is for the gear that you have. So I'm doing about 30k damage right now, but with the right weapon setup you can do upwards of 180,000 damage with this build. So I'm doing roughly a 1/6 or so of the damage that I could be doing. Let me just resurrect my Merc there because he actually wasn't with us, so we were missing a bit of damage. I'm just going to buff up again. So one thing that you need to remember is most of your buffs have about a 4-minute duration, so you need to buff up periodically so that you don't lose your buffs and your extra damage and defenses. As you would have seen before, the AoE is fantastic on this build, and if we have a look here at the single target damage on Diablo, before I could even finish that sentence, he was gone, absolutely destroyed. Even though this is players 1, you can see just how strong this build is, kind of one-shotting any monsters in front of you, even in this terror zone. And even with really shoddy gear like I have shown, this build is just really highly tuned and very sort of OP in a lot of ways. And I think there definitely could be some nerfs incoming for the build, but in my opinion that is maybe for the best. We don't want another Mosaic Assassin scenario on our hands here where it's sort of the only choice and the only option of build if you want to be competitive and push the highest tier of difficulty and content. I think some of the tuning that could be done to this build would potentially be changing its hit characteristics, where it shows that it grants you extra attack rating. It doesn't seem to make hit checks when hitting a monster or dealing damage to a monster. It seems to automatically hit, which I think is in one way making this a bit overpowered, because it kind of acts like a melee skill, but then at the same time doesn't use many of the melee mechanics, and I think that is maybe a bug or a bit of an oversight by Blizzard in this regard, and I think that could be changed to maybe balance the skill a bit more. And also just its damage scaling I think is a bit too much, and like has been said in many other videos, using a shield and a two-handed weapon is also in many ways a little bit overtuned or overpowered, and I think that maybe if you could just use the tomes or grimoires instead of shields, such as Phoenix, which can almost triple your damage, I think that would be a more fair and balanced approach to this build. And I don't think it's completely broken, but I do think it's just a little overtuned and a little overpowered at this point in time. Again, something to remember is just keeping your buffs up every couple minutes, because they do fall off relatively quickly and we don't want to lose those for the bonuses they give us. So when I'm not cursed and everything is going well, this sort of setup of gear is doing around 42k of damage, if you just saw that briefly there. And yeah, 42k damage with middle of the road sort of mid-game gear is a bit on the high side in my opinion, and in some ways I'm not complaining right now because it makes your farm and clear speeds very fast, but it is a little bit on the over-tuned side in my opinion. I don't want Blizzard to completely change this character and nerf it into oblivion, but you know, some changes I think could definitely benefit it to balance it more in line with the other classes in Diablo 2 Resurrected. You can use your Sigil of Lethargy to help crowd control monsters and mobs in front of you, but with the damage output you are doing, it is often unnecessary to even use that sigil, where against boss fights I think it comes more into its own and becomes very useful, but for your general trash mobs and elites it's not really necessary to use your sigils, even though it is a very effective and powerful skill. So if you don't have Enigma or Staff of Teleportation, and whilst you're playing through the game, you can always just use your Blade Warp as a tool for mobility and utility in order to get around and reposition yourself, your merc, and your bound demons. So as we can see with Bale's waves here, you're absolutely shredding. This is such a powerful build, and you can always just lay your Sigil of Lethargy on the ground in order to crowd control those enemies and do some extra damage to them. So as you can see, we have about 2.8k life, we have fair defense, nothing spectacular, we have a lot of damage being absorbed by our demon through Blood Oath, which makes us very tough, and overall the Warlock is just both tough as well as outputting amazing damage, having mobility with Blood Warp, and it's Blade Warp, not Blood Warp, and it's just a really well-rounded and well put together class. And I think it sort of shows in the sense that this was made now 20 odd years after the game's release, and the other classes sort of aren't quite as well rounded as this, even with years of minor tweaks and tuning. I think that the Warlock has really shown what a modern day Diablo 2 Resurrected class would be developed like. While we are buffing up, we get our extra damage by consuming our Goatman, we get our extra damage from our Hexbane, and we also get damage from the auras that our Merc and our Bound Demon provide, being Fanaticism and Might, and you could also have Concentration if your Merc had a Pride instead of the Treachery, or not Treachery, the Thresher Reaper's Toll that I have at this point in time. And just to reiterate again, the very mid-level gear that my character is wearing right now, and just how powerful it is. It really is a highly tuned build and a highly tuned skill, Echoing Strike. So as you see here, just a couple throws of Echoing Strike in Players 1 hull difficulty just really mows down anything in front of you. That's it, hey, your streamer drops a Tull's armor in this terror zone after we already found our Vamp Gaze. I just need to make some space here quickly. Or I can actually put that over here. That is a very cool drop and a very nice item for the Holy Grail. Streamer drops for the win. So guys, that's going to about wrap it up for us here on this Echoing Strike guide for the Warlock. I think it is a very highly tuned build and a very fun build, and it will be interesting to see what Blizzard do with this in the coming ladder reset tomorrow, as well as just future patches. It will be interesting to see if they deem this to be a sort of balanced and fair class and build, or if they think that some nerfs are in order. Either way, I hope that you found out a little bit more about this build, a little bit more about this class, and hopefully found the guide useful. If you have any questions, please comment below. I will try my best to answer all of them. And if you found this video enjoyable or useful, subscribe is always a very great thing and a very appreciated thing for the channel. So please hit that subscribe button, and we will catch you again soon in the next one for some more Motherboards and we will catch you again soon in the next one for some more Mana and Motherboards. Cheers.